Chapter 5. April 1941. This is not a police cell, you are not peelers. Josephine Joyce stared defiantly at the man who had now entered what was, from appearances, a police cell. Dudley Clark, a demeanor of lightness and slowness, got up from the chair he had sat in, irradiated by Josephine's demurrage. "Oh, indeed," he replied. "Josephine Joyce, this is war and you are being held under several charges. Robbery, theft, treachery against the state. I am of the Irish Free State." Josephine shot back. "I have documents to say you are not." "And there are." He glanced down to the papers, then back to Josephine, "Other charges." He paced around the desk in the gloom, his eyes fixed on her. Hugh Dalton was too trusting, even for operative training. "You defied all reason." Josephine sat back, not triumphant, just numb. She had been arrested, and had decided she would be hanged now. What was the point of this? "You were with your brother." "I was with my brother." And now she was in jail. She had gone when the Biff had invaded Tower Hill and Cable Street. She had been delighted to hear of the opposition, vast opposition to the British Union of Fascists. But she knew then she had nowhere to go if she left her brother, left Moseley. A vague idea to go to America, like William, lingered in her mind. But she had been arrested for shoplifting bread, and now she was in a cell in Whitehall Place. "Your other brother, there or thereabout," Clark replied. "Why steal bread in such a way? It was obvious you'd get caught." "I was hungry," Josephine replied, simply. At least Moseley couldn't touch her in here. She could be hanged, would be hanged when they found out about what she had done in Ireland. All guarantees from Dalton would be null and void. But Clark was not a policeman. Instead, he asked her about Ireland, and Michael O'Neill, and the conversation wove around contraband goods to Ireland, for she wanted to raise funds for the Cumann ban, and how her handling of guns had led her to the black shirt's door. "I was sorry to leave," Josephine told Dudley Clark. "Moseley ice a broken bar, a monster. It was get myself arrested, or?" Clark looked at her, thoughtfully. "There is an or broken bar and it involves Moseley's pistol." "Very good," Dudley Clark told her, and repositioned the chair beside her. "But first, tell me about your father." 88,888,888. April 1943. Looking out of the window of the small room, Josephine picked out the shop she needed to visit, and the one she needed to be seen to visit. She had a handkerchief to send home. The post office dealt with the Red Cross parcels and with return messages. Douglas Bader's letters would be checked and the Solinin Square added. It would get to London and the War Office, who knew the sign, progress. What progress, and by whom, they wouldn't know, but the top men would discuss, and Bill Sterling would get to find out. She closed her eyes as the Irishman's knock came loudly and suddenly. "Bring the ledger, Ethan. He's awake." She sat beside David at the table in the windowless room, the large book in front of her, the heavy iron door slammed shut with the force of O'Reilly'd muscle, leaving them in the semi-darkness. She played the well-practiced part so that O'Reilly and possibly Perham could detect her losing her patience. "You are a ghost, Sterling," she spat, tossing a folder onto the desk. "A shadow that thinks it can hide in plain sight." She leaned forward. "Tell me about the raids in Benghazi." Now, O'Reilly, pausing at the door, had heard enough to know she was going her best to wear down the prisoner. Better than beating them, he supposed. He was an officer, and was exempt. He, John Francis O'Reilly, would have beat Sterling, not least because he had seen how he looked at Ethan. Defiant, disgusted. Apart from their struggle. And, yes, lasciviously. He could not have that and face her brother. Ethan was doing an excellent job, so much so, Prum was happy to let O'Reilly leave to broadcast full-time in Berlin. He could drop his persona. Pat O'Brien. David Sterling turned in his chair, his tall frame cramped, his face a mask of aristocratic boredom that hid a violent hunter. "My dear woman, the sun in North Africa was dreadfully overrated. Too much sand in the gin. I find this Saxon gloom quite refreshing." "You're doing an excellent job at remaining a phantom," Josephine went on. "Something had to go in the ledger, anything, or she would be replaced. Or was your capture staged? Sterling jerked his head and gave her a look of loathing. I'd rather rot here than breathe the same air as a woman who does the work of William Joyce. Tell me, does Haw Haw write your scripts, or do you come up with this drivel yourself? She kicked the door and shifted the table to disguise her voice. A bit like the fool out there. My brother likes the sound of his own voice, she whispered, then raised it again, for effect. And you are a fool who thinks he can win a war from a hole in the ground. You murdered Eve. He bit back. You've murdered men for less than what she did. There was the start. If that plane hadn't gone down, more so agents, including your precious SAS, would have been led into a slaughterhouse. Why do you? I saved the war, Sterling. Care, treacherous. You saved a broken bar. ... You just lost to Mistress. Sterling lunged, but the weeks of starvation had weakened him. Josephine caught his wrist with a strength that spoke of her training at 64, and at Ear House under Bill. She wrestled him back against the wall, her face inches from his. Listen to me, you arrogant bastard. She kicked the chair to make a noise. Weeks of strong-arm tactics had produced nothing. What she was about to do was risky. You want to lead? You want to be back with the old boys network downstairs? She bit back her Ulster accent and channeled Joyce. I can move you. I can tell Prim that you've broken, that you're willing to provide names of your desert contacts in exchange. I won't play the turncoat for you, Sterling growled. Predictably, Josephine thought. You'll play whatever part one tell you to play. She hissed. The escape committee in the officers' quarters is stuck. They have the will, but they lack the tactical genius of a man who knows how to sabotage a base from the inside. I am moving you there because I need you to lead them out. Not for Eve, but for P. She had nearly gone too far. The SO agent so deep in Nazi Germany that she had almost forgotten herself. Josephine took the risk. I was once so? Liar. Sterling fought back under her grasp. I compromised a cell in Paris. Those people are brave, David Sterling, not just drunkenly, hot anger brave, but small, covert, risk-taking chances. You get this? Josephine glanced around the solitary confinement cell, and downstairs. She glanced to the floor. Officers get luxuries and letters from families and records with silk maps inside them. So get Nats while there. It had struck. Sterling knew the horror there, knew of Nact and Nebel through Dudley Clark. Josephine had to break the deadlock somehow, find a way in past the steel. I bargained my life to this place to avoid being cooked alive like poor Sonia. I took the chances I could to save my own skin. And maybe people like her. Josephine released her grip and allowed Sterling his own autonomy. He was looking at her wondering whether to believe her or not. Give me anything, even something they will half believe. Then you can be the pirate king in Penzance. She glanced to the floor again briefly, as the Arthur Sullivan tune filtered through. Your words are poison, Sterling declared, as he stalked back to the table. They may be gifting in your mind, Josephine told him. They may also be your gift. She raised her voice. Benghazi. What happened? What do you know? She sat back down at the table and began to write. February 1943, 2 armored vehicles with no identity numbers. Yes, she thought when she had clocked his expression. I do know, broke into the Italian base and Sterling continued, with false information padding the shell of the story. His own part and that of Randolph Churchill omitted. She thanked him, trying not to dwell on the part her brother would have played, loud and leading, as always. They had not known each other then. David Sterling, the Roman Catholic aristocrat and Josephine Maine widow and Irish Republican. She would sell his words to Eggers and Prum and, if she did well, he would be on his way downstairs and on his way out. 88,888,888, July 1941. And so she had travelled to Scotland, in a carriage where the seats turned to face the windows when the Highlands came into view. It was stunning. Even the juvenile, angry mind of Josephine O'Neill had to admit that. You did some terrible things in Ireland, he commented, as one of the cars from his estate came to collect them from the station. The British did some terrible things to us. Not you, Personally, your mother was from Lancaster, and your father was a Presbyterian. You chose the life of a Republican. Many Protestants have, she told him. Was Parnell not a Protestant? Is that what you are, then? Irish, she replied, simply. She remembered Paddy, Robbie, saying that when he replied, he was not one for church, either, and Margaret Main would rather have died than to bring the girl, her husband's sin, with them to worship. So she had become Irish, looking over the mountains, like someone had put a half-dozen potatoes together and shaken topsoil over them, at the blue-green sea and the beauty of the sky rising out of it, and dreamed of the old kings and the supernatural beings of old Ireland, all the things that Mrs. Main scorned and belittled, all the things the woman could never take away from her. This was David's room, not that he spent a great deal of time in it. Bill laughed, showing her where she was to sleep. Always out of that window and onto the roof, or some such exploit. Never could keep still, hated a cage. A broken bar. Never could keep still, a broken bar. Bill's words echoed in Josephine's head. A broken bar. Hated a cage. A broken bar. A broken bar. Hated a cage more than his own will to never give up intelligence. She wondered. A broken bar. Let me show you the drawing room. A broken bar. It was I who installed the door panel here. Bill Sterling pressed the pine near the bookshelf. Father would have hated it, but it's a bit of fun, don't you think? A broken bar. And she trained. A broken bar. Trained with Bill, trained getting out of a locked room. A broken bar. Learned the principles of sabotage, disruption, and the most effective technique was a broken bar. How to incapacitate, not just supply lines and logistics but people too. A broken bar. A broken bar. They wandered the estate and beyond, and Joey learned which fungi were edible and how to boil water so it wouldn't kill. Here. A broken bar. How to light fires strategically, and case the most beneficial industrial targets. A broken bar. A broken bar. Joey learned how to use basic Morse code and semaphore, and several European languages. She hated French, but was adept, fortunately, at German. A broken bar. He challenged her physically and built on her agility and nimbleness through strength and anticipation. A broken bar. A broken bar. They mocked up situations where Josephine had to break in using just what she had on her, locate and learn a message from a file. She had to think on her feet and convince the commandant that what she was doing was perfectly legitimate, then build the crystal radio set and accurately transmit what she had learned later when she was sure she was alone. A broken bar. How to use a compass and map, and how to make a compass using any iron or steel by dismantling a radiogram. A broken bar. And this is how to use the sun to find the way if making your own compass goes south, so to speak, Bill told her, chuckling at his own joke. They strolled one morning after a night in the field, and Bill spoke suddenly, breaking the dream of the morning silence. He paints, he told Josephine, or at least used to. Used India ink to paint a rude cartoon on the oak paneling of the lecture hall at Trinity's. The history professor. He smirked a little, as Josephine turned her head. He was sent down. Mother only got to know about the 3 better transgressions. A broken bar. Lived in Paris and tried to make a living as an artist. A broken bar. Bill shook his head. No heather, no grouse. He came home. A broken bar. They trod the peat and moss, and then he found writing. All he had ever wanted to do, he said, was to be a writer. Then father challenged him to join up. Joey turned her head, listening. Those man, this life. A broken bar. She knew how the gentry lived. Ethan Coyle recounted that all that was needed to disrupt the supply chain of an upper-class family within the upper-class system was to stop service, as Charles Boycott found out to his cost. My father said women were better than men, Bill went on, not stopping to hold the fence as he passed through onto the land nearer the house. No chivalry here. Psychological toughness was the watchword. The Boers had women fighting with them. Brave women, the lot of them. It's probably why we lost. They walked through the courtyard. Girls can get any amount of information from most men. Get them going. Don't think there is anything ignoble about army intelligence work. There is not. Decidedly not. No army can move an inch or win the slightest victory without it. Help us move miles. Help us win victories. The work is as necessary, and as noble, as the regular scrapping. But, be careful. Mouths shut. ears open. Joey had flinched at the shout, then laughed. Bill was a little over 10 years older than she was, and she was getting used to his manner as Lord Sterling. Mouths shut, legs open, more like, he added, as he conceded to hold the servants' entrance door. Don't make it come to that, Ethan, he added, leaning close to her ear and lowering his voice, or you'll know all that will have been in vain. Ethan. Bill had called her that, after remembering her speaking of the Kimanamban leader. It had become a joke that stuck. In the years since, she had forgotten. But a record being played, Mendelssohn, from the officers' dorms invoked the memory of wood smoke and scotch. 88,888,888. April 1943. Josephine had been to see Prum with the ledger. Large, stocky, his Prussian moustache twitched as he read. And what do you suggest now? He asked. You the longest time with him have spent. The chance was there, and Josephine took it. Let him have what we promised. Mixing with Bader, Reed and others of his class, he may relax. At the present time, he is as a limpet on a rock, and we have to use force when a measure of liberty may do its work. Prum took it up with Eggers and a decision was made. More convincing information and Sterling could join the other officers. So, Josephine returned that evening to a David Sterling eating a thin potato broth. She waited by the door. Come, sit, he declaimed. Rules could not have produced better. Venison, oysters, grouse. I've had it all tonight. Join me, traitorous bitch. Josephine said nothing, but watched him eat. I must have done something well, for they have fed me. He raised some of the soup on his spoon and let it fall back into the tin bowl. Thee's a broken bar. Would you call it food? A broken bar? Sterling glared at her, his tone changing to Sahara dry sarcasm. And now you're here, so the evening is complete. Josephine parked the hatred leveled at her and moved to the table, sitting opposite David Sterling. When he laid down his spoon, she nodded. Please, don't tell stop on my account. He glared at her with familiar loathing. Somehow, I have lost my appetite. He pushed the bowl away, as if it were a bowl of excrement. Considering the quality of food in the castle, Josephine guessed that she wasn't far wrong. With over-exaggerated expectation, he glared at Josephine. The news you have shared, the Abe were pleased with. Sterling frowned, theatrically. What have I shared, pray? The Benghazi information? However, Josephine lowered her voice and leaned towards him. Twittering, she told him, then almost immediately continued. The drop in Sicily. It was discovered, she said, loudly, then dropped her voice again. 3 special forces took out a whole brigade at Benghazi. You were there. They know this. Sterling replied, the division was annihilated. She got to her feet and continued louder again, close to Sterling, still seated. Germany thanks you for your service, Major Sterling. Josephine broke off as the door opened. She glanced from the door back to Sterling, and raised her arm, then lowered it, as if she had about to have been attacked. It was Prum, and Ethan took some steps away. I suspect, Prum addressed Ethan, that Major Sterling has not told us enough about the raid. Yet, with what he did tell you, we do have enough, he continued, continuing to address David Sterling. We wiped out the naval unit. 3 on fire, no hope of rescue. Josephine felt her heart sink as she saw David Sterling's face. Prum then looked across to Josephine. Germany thanks Neutral Ireland for allowing the shipping lanes to go unchallenged. He smiled. Your brother will send the word out of our victory. You are to brief O'Reilly so he can perfect the Irish. Josephine nodded, refusing to look back at Sterling. You are better at the language than he is. As for you, Major Sterling, I have post for you, mail, and you may cone out of solitary confinement now, for some of the day, at least. You may mix with the other officers. And Prum, O'Reilly and Josephine accompanied Major David Sterling down the narrow, winding stairs from the 4th floor to the 2nd. What happened to your legs? Josephine would ask him, sometime in the future, their naked bodies as close as bodies could be. A bit of a nasty to-do, Sterling would reply. Broke them whilst improvising parachutes. I'd like to say it was the fault of a countryman of yours. He would comb his fingers through her hair. But, no, No, the fault was all mine. Now, though, Josephine noticed his hands steadying himself down the staircase, fingertips on whitewashed walls, his gait slightly uneven. "Bring him out tomorrow," Prim instructed, as the roar of welcome embraced Sterling as one of their own. He handed her the ledger that O'Reilly was carrying. "Do your job." 88,888,888. At the same time, but in a land away from Germany, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Sterling had entered a Tunis club that served the officers to hear what Maine wanted in the way of assistance. To save the Special Air Service from dissolution, came the bold response. "I'll get you men," Sterling Sr. promised. "And, as you will not longer be in planes across to Sicily, me a change of name to evade the reach of Clark." "The Special Raiding Service?" Paddy Maine asked, doubtfully. "More whiskey," and Bill leaned in across the table. "Is that why you were so depressed?" Josephine Maine looked him in the eye. "Despite your reassurances, I do believe she is dead. Dead and gone, poor little thing, out of this terrible, terrible world." A broken bar. "I do hope not a broken bar. I gave her the best training I could." Paddy picked up his head. "You meant what you said." "She scurried about France making trouble for over a year," Bill confided. "Then I sent her to David." "Paddy, if there was one person who could disrupt the Nazis, play merry hell, it's her." "Let's hope she's alive, then," Paddy concluded, dejected. "Oh, she is." At this moment, Bill exclaimed, happily, "Just about to break my brother's spirit, and he will tell her all sorts of stories, most of which are half true, to get himself out of solitary." "Oh, Joey, a broken bar." Paddy shook his head. "If Eve is a collaborator or a broken bar, it is certain," Bill told him. "I am more certain of this than anything, because I have proof a broken bar." "Arrest her then," Paddy prompted, sipping his whiskey. "Certainly not," Bill replied, sipping his own. "That would cause no end of trouble. We will, instead, see it unfold." He bent his head to Paddy. Josephine knew. Paddy Maine said nothing, for nothing such as this would surprise him about his baby sister. "Drink up. It's the turning point of this war. We have them, Maine, Sicily, then Normandy, then Berlin, because of us." "And her," Paddy added, silently. "More than most. She has given, and may still end up dead in a German castle." 88,888,888. The goon baiting began before Josephine even stepped into the room, pushing down on the handle, and she was greeted with chants and sneers from the officers. The Red Fox, Douglas Bader, stood near the door as she opened it, turning his pipe scalingly as she entered. Pat Reed was less reserved, and threw a shoe at her, which missed. An officer whose name Joey didn't know recooled in mock distaste. "Look at the state of it," a voice shrieked from the French quarters, which provoked laughter. "Hey, Ethan Joyce," another roared. The chant of goon taken up by a dozen bored, angry men. "Did the Gestapo give you those silk stockings for a dance, or did you have to earn them on your back?" A rain of booing followed. Bill's training kept her face a mask of sullen indifference, even as a thrown crust of moldy rye bread bounced off her shoulder. She walked past a group of officers who were hurriedly leaning against a freshly whitewashed wall, an amateurish cover-up for the faint scratching sounds of a tunnel-digging team beneath the floorboards. Nearby, a group of theatrical prisoners from the Colditz Amateur Dramatic Society were loudly rehearsing the Pirates of Penzance in order to drown out the sound of a forbidden radio being tuned in the corner. Joey pushed through the throng toward the center of the courtyard where the prominently gathered, those hot officers whose fame, or infamy had brought them to be thus classified. There stood David Sterling, flanked by Upham, the twice VC winner, who looked ready to throttle Joey on principle. And it took all of Josephine's will not to look back to check that the two guards who had been behind her at the door were still there. "Easy, Charles," Sterling murmured, his Scottish lilt cutting through the cacophony. He looked Joey up and down slyly, as if appraising her in front of the men, his peers. That got no reaction, either. "The Abwehr is getting desperate," Charles Upham sneered. "To send that an Irish traitor," Sterling continued, "and at that." Josephine did flinch. He smiled at her, unpleasantly. Anyone here broken bar Irish? Read. He looked across to the bed where the man who had thrown the shoe was leaning. He raised the other of the pair. A Fenian here, for you. Derailed the Dublin to Galway, many lives were lost. Josephine turned, to brazen it out, but then turned instead to Sterling. I'm just here for the interrogation, Major, Josephine replied, her voice returning to the imitation of William Joyce's. Sterling leaned in, his voice a lethal whisper. Whatever you're looking for in this castle, little girl, you'll find the rope first. Yet, with the threats, and the wake of howling and screeching accompanying them as Josephine brought David out of the dorm and into the interrogation room, he did follow, and sat before her, taut and guarded. When the door clicked behind them, Josephine tried her next card. It was a gamble, she decided, but if she could convince him she was indeed a scared little mouse underneath it all, and that she feared for her safety, this might aid his stay with the officers and make it more likely for him to be part of an escape attempt. I am Irish, she told Sterling, and you know an Irishman well. Tell me about Maine. It was going well and, with hindsight, too well. Sterling was more loquacious, more lively in his speech, and sat with one arm over the chair, chatting to her as if they were the best of friends. Maine once pinned a smaller officer, Johnny Wiseman, to the ground, called for a razor, and forcibly shaved off half of his beard without soap or water. David Sterling laughed. I'm ever so sorry to be such a nuisance, sir. Wiseman told him. It's not you, it's your facial hair that disturbs me, Paddy replied. And then once, in a crowded bar in Cairo, I sat with him and Mike Sadler, a broken bar. Sterling's face was giddy at the tale. Paddy suddenly produced a hand grenade from his pocket, pulling out the pin and placing it in the center of the table. As the grenade started to smoke, some of the locals dived under the table while others shrank back. Sadler, too. I made a decision to stay where I was. Sterling looked across to Josephine, merriment in his eyes. I knew Paddy well enough to think it was only a joke. He leaned towards Josephine. Paddy, a broken bar, had previously cut the detonator from the fuse. It was his dark joke. Now, Sterling added, is that what you wanted of an Irishman? You assimilate you and he. Josephine felt her heart beat in her chest just a little harder, and the sign that something was wrong telegraphed weaker to her brain. Listen, give me more, and I'll do all I can to get you to the dorm permanently, Josephine replied, leaning forward too. It has to be convincing. Oh, I have one for you, he continued, 100% proof genuine. His eyes crinkled in a way that Josephine had never seen before, and she watched as he reached into his pocket, taking out a letter. Thank you for the mail, by the way. I have one from my brother and near broken bar. He laid the envelope on the table between them, from a very dear friend of mine. Sterling's eyes dropped to the paper. A Major David Sterling, Colditz Castle was written on the front of the trifolded letter in purple ink. Josephine's heart began to sink and guessed the climate before he even began to read it. My dearest David, he read. I write this with a heart still racing from the horror of what occurred at Trieste. To think that only moments separated me from that terrible inferno. I had forgotten my vanity case and turned back a trivial act that, by some miracle, spared my life. The explosion was so sudden, so violent, it felt like a personal assault on the very hope we share. The authorities speak of sabotage, of accidents, but I know there are dark forces who cannot stand to see us together, or perhaps they envy the work you do for England. My heart aches to be back in your arms, away from the smoke and the screams of the engines. London is grey and lonely without you beside me, though I find comfort in the memory of our last night in Cairo. Do not let the bitterness of this war harden you, my love. I am safe, I am yours, and I am waiting for the day you return to me. With all my devotion, E. When Sterling slammed his hand on the table, it was a gesture of unalloyed triumph. Josephine realized with horror she had reacted to the words, and was out of the chair. Go, take that to Perham, Sterling peered. Although he will already know a broken bar, take it to Joyce. Let him put on the airwaves and allied triumph, for once. Sterling too was out of his seat, edging towards her. But Josephine was steel and she stood her ground, revulsion that such a woman still lived. She killed so many, I don't believe, people. Josephine stepped towards him, striking an uppercut, which Sterling did not expect. You! He finished, reeling at the blow. Josephine did not stop, however. As he pushed back, Josephine grabbed the letter from his unguarded hand. Sterling raised an arm, the other hand grabbing for her grey, woolen uniform. Josephine winced at the attack she thought was coming and raised her own arm to protect herself. In midair, David froze, then slowly let his arm drop. She took a step to one side, composing herself. "You're shaking," he observed, with laughter in his voice. "It's the lack of coal, not the pleasure of your company," she retorted hotly, though she didn't pull away when Sterling made a grab for the Eve's letter. She met his gaze with a scaling intensity, knowing that the paper would tear before she at least was letting go. "You think because you're a Sterling, the world owes you a grand romance. It doesn't. It owes you nothing but a shallow grave, unless you do exactly as I say." David's grip tightened on the paper, his knuckles grazing hers. "Well, if we're playing the truth game, then you're a manipulative, jealous little witch, and if your schemes have come to nothing, I'm delighted." Sterling made to grab Eve's letter back, but Josephine, triggered by the kernel of truth in the jibe, was too quick for him. The love letter curled into ashes in the fireplace. It was the final straw. Sterling didn't just strike, he exploded. His hands, together in two fists, channeling every ounce of his grief for Eve, his loathing for William Joyce's traitorous broadcasts, and grabbed her by the lapels. Slamming her back against the stone wall, Sterling slapped Josephine with a heavy, open-handed blow, following it with another, his fist catching her in the stomach, doubling her over. Josephine fought back, though, and ducked as the fist came towards her face once more, and Sterling hit stone for his trouble. He hauled her up by her hair to strike again, but the blow was impotent as two guards smelled by O'Reilly got the first. Josephine staggered away, the next step in the plan one of triumph. "You think I've forgotten?" he roared, held back as he was by the might of the two Nazis. "You think I wouldn't enjoy breaking every bone in your treacherous Fenian body? You're a stain on the earth, just like your brother."